he had a Muslim testify for him in court, which is true. And he achieved great position of prominence in Islamic society, which is true. He was the physician even to Salahuddin, I believe, by the end of his career. But even Maimonides, someone who we look at as an example of somebody who existing at a high level in Islamic society, when he's writing to his own people, he's honest. And he says that the Muslims have inflicted persecution upon us. We have suffered greatly. His words are, no nation has persecuted us more than this nation.
Okay.
So this is clearly, and even you put forward the argument that's been made. The fact that this has been universally accepted by Jews as being part of the narrative suggests there must be a remnant of truth in there, that there was persecution of Jews in Muslim society. Now, let's get on to what is that persecution.
Okay.
You made 2 points.
Yeah.
I made 2 points and you made 2 points in response. Now you said, and maybe this is why we can make it a little more engaging, because the big long speeches don't really help any of us engage the viewers.
I agree.
So I'm going to say, I can give categoric examples of where I'm persecuted against in a caliphate that's run according to Sharia, according to the Sunnah of Mohammed. And my best example, my easiest example, zakat. Zakat is fixed. Yeah, there is a fixed amount of money that the Muslims pay. Jizya is not fixed. Jizya is dependent upon whatever the caliph decides that the Jew is going to pay, or the person of the book is going to pay. Now, under some caliphates, that was a reasonable amount. And it does say that the poor don't have to pay the jizya. But if they're not poor, then it's down to the caliph to determine what the Jews pay, what the Christians pay. And that is separate from what the Muslims pay. And it can be a lot more, and it can be less. It really depends on the caliphate. And so when you segregate a society and you say Muslims pay this tax and non-Muslims pay another tax, that ultimately is an example of discrimination that has been abused throughout history. Okay, I'm going to make it more quick fire.
Great points. Now coming back to the letter of Maimonides, first of all we need to show whether the letter is actually authentic. Even if it is authentic, let's assume for the sake of the argument, Maimonides actually wrote that letter. There is no problem in it. I'll tell you why. Maimonides has been severely persecuted by a Muslim group called Al-Muwahidun, right? If a person who was tortured or persecuted by ISIS today and was to write a letter about Muslims, I wouldn't blame him. I wouldn't blame him for assuming that I am being persecuted by Muslims, because these people have the appearance of Muslims, unfortunately, right? Now Maimonides, the question is, when he wrote this letter, where was he writing this letter from? Egypt. Okay. Now what period of his Egyptian existence was this? Was this the early period when he had recently come from Spain, having been persecuted and put through all that? Or was it actually after he had become the physician to the Sultan himself? Okay, if Maimonides is writing this letter after he's a physician to the Sultan, the doctors to the Sultan, then there are two options here. Either he is lying about his condition, because how can you be the physician to the Sultan, the doctor to the Sultan, to the king himself, and say our condition is very bad? And it is very possible that he was lying. Why? Because why is he writing this letter? And who is he writing this letter to? According to what Joseph read, this letter was being written to a Jewish group of people in Yemen who were considering accepting Islam, who were contemplating becoming Muslims. And his job as Rambam, or the second Moses, or the shepherd of the flock, if you like, his job was to sway them, to put them off, to push them away from Islam. And to say all those things, it does exactly that. These people are barbarians, they persecute us, we're not happy with them, don't accept Islam therefore. So all these things put together, one can easily contextualize the letter. But looking at the bigger picture, now it is very clear that Joseph accepted that Maimonides definitely had a high position in Muslim societies. If the Jews were persecuted as he claimed earlier, why would a Jew be a physician to the Sultan? Why would a Jewish person be given that position. And such a sensitive position. Who is a physician? Someone who's checking your pulse, someone who's prescribing medicine for you, even possibly giving you medicine. He can easily poison the Sultan and kill him. Why would the Sultan trust a Jewish man, and not only any ordinary Jewish man, a rabbi of that repute, a rabbi of that status, someone who is known as the second Moses among the Jews, later on actually. So let's not be anachronistic about history. So it is very clear that he had a high position. Now it doesn't stop there. We can look at other Jewish testimonies from Spain. No, very quickly. Yeah, let me finish this. Yeah, very quickly. Yeah, there was a Jewish rabbi called Bahya bin Pakuda. Have you heard of him? Yes? Yeah. You know Bahya, yeah? Bahya bin Pakuda, writing in Cordoba, 1080s. He writes that our living condition is not the same as the Muslims, it is better than theirs. We are more prosperous than the Muslims are under the rule of the Arabs. There you go, that's one testimony. Let's fast forward. Let's
Al-Andalus.
Al-Andalus, yes. Let's fast forward.
During that,
yeah, let's fast forward. Okay, we have, for example, in the 9th century, okay, there is an anonymous Jewish source, a commentary on the Torah. Okay, it's called Petrus Ephron. Petrus Ephron, Karen Armstrong, she refers to this book in her History of Jerusalem, and she states that this anonymous author, Jewish author, wrote about the conditions of the Jewish people in Jerusalem in the 9th century during the Abbasid period. He states that we have been honored by the Ishmaelites, that we worship together the same God in this holy place. In other words, he was praising the condition of the Jewish people under Islamic domain. Then we have other testimonies from, I'm giving you different dynasties very quickly because time is running out and Joseph needs to talk about this, yeah? And I have written an article on this, by the way. This is why I know these sources, yeah? Then we move forward to the Ottoman period when Jerusalem was governed by the Ottomans. To be very precise, during the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who governed from 1520 to 1566, if I'm not mistaken. Right? He governed 46 years. During his reign, the Jewish people flourished in Jerusalem. How do we know this? A scholar named Amnon Cohen. Amnon Cohen, who published his book in 1994, and the book is titled A World from Within. The court records from the Islamic Court of Jerusalem. In these two volumes, he discusses the history of the Jewish cases. Are you listening, everyone? Jewish cases filed within the Islamic Court of Jerusalem. So he studied cases from the year 1500 to 1570. 70 years of cases he studied. He came up with 1,000 Jewish cases filed in the Sharia court, filed by the Jewish people voluntarily. And Amnon Cohen, being a Jewish scholar from Israel, he wanted to know why the Jews were doing that. Why were they going to the Sharia court, even though they had their Beth Dins, they had their own Jewish courts in Jerusalem. But he states, this is a Jewish Israeli scholar, in 1994, he states, based upon his study, this was because the Jews expected justice to come quicker from the Sharia court than their own courts. And cases vary from for example, from a case about nafaka, what we call, provisions. If a wife has been divorced and she needs provisions from the husband, and there are other domestic cases being discussed in these courts. So his conclusion is that the Jews of Jerusalem in the 16th century were more prosperous than the Muslims were.
So perfect.
Okay, wait. Of course, Joseph. One second.
You don't do quick fire. You really don't do quick fire.
I'm finishing because this topic is so important. And
yeah, but
I'm coming back to zakat issue. Okay, so these examples from different dynasties in different periods in different places show you what general pattern of Muslim behavior was: kind, generous, and harmonious towards the Jews, right? The Jewish people flourished in different ways. I can give you examples. Joseph, please. I was very patient listening to you. Be patient with me as well. I know some of this information is difficult to fathom. But I'm giving references. Wrong, right, and most references I gave are from Jewish sources, by the way. Even Bernard Lewis, someone like Bernard Lewis, a staunch Zionist who advised the US government to attack Iraq in 2003, even him in his book Jews of Islam acknowledges that the Muslims treated the Jews with generosity in comparison to what was happening to them in Christian Europe. Okay, so and over 1,000 years, Bernard Lewis states, for over 1,000 years, Jews survived extinction due to Muslim protection for over 1,000 years. And he also states 90% of the Jewish population of the world survived destruction under the protection of Islam and Muslims. Bernard Lewis, again, my references are very clear. Go and check and come back to me if I'm lying. Okay, now next point, zakat.
Can we come back to zakat?
No. You raised it. Please be patient with me. I'm finishing very soon and you can come back. I will listen to you patiently. No, you can't come in because it's me and Joseph. Okay, so zakat issue. Now Joseph made a claim that zakat is fixed and jizya is not fixed. Actually, that's not true as well, because in our earliest sources, we are told, firstly, the primary rule to deal with the non-Muslims. What is the primary rule? In Bukhari, we have a statement from the second Caliph of Islam, Umar bin Khattab. Umar was the second Caliph of Islam. And what did the Prophet say about him? Alaykum bi sunnati wa sunnati al-khulafa ar-rashidin al-mahdi min ba'di. Upon you is my way and the way of my rightly guided caliphs. Who were they? Umar is one of them, so we have to follow him. Umar, upon his deathbed, when his stomach was split open, dying man, he advised for his successor. He stated, whoever succeeds me, beware of the rights of the non-Muslims. Do not overburden them. Do not put a burden upon them more than they can bear. Umar, the second Caliph of Islam, the words of a dying man, right? These words were directly relevant to the Jewish people, okay? Because who was he talking about? He was talking about the Jews and the Christians. Okay, so what is jizya? Jizya is 1 gold coin per year. It is clearly stated in Futul Buldan, Imam Buladhuri's book, Futul Buldan, the conquest of lands. In that book, there are documents that clearly state that the jizya is 1 gold coin every year, which is 4 grams of gold, in current value, 200 pounds a year. So if there is a millionaire Jewish merchant who has £1 million in his bank account, in theory, theoretically, according to the Islamic sources, he has to pay 200 pounds every year. If a Muslim has £1 million in his bank account, he must pay 2.5%, which is 25,000 pounds. Where is justice in that? I, as a Muslim, can stand up here and say, you know what, Islam is actually not just to the Muslim people. Islam is more just to the Jewish people. The Jewish merchant has to pay 200 pounds every year, even though he may have £1 million in his bank account. But me, I have to give 25,000 pounds over or for £1 million. Now, this is theoretically the earliest Islamic sources. What happened later on, no doubt, sources are abused, they were misused. Even today, groups like ISIS and other extremist entities are using sources to abuse. The Jewish people are doing it. The state of Israel is abusing, misusing the Jewish sources. So we have extremists, we have unpleasant characters, we have people who abuse our sources throughout our history. Jews did it, Muslims did it, Christians did it. So the good thing about us, me and Joseph, is that we are brothers in that thought. Why? Because he also believes that there are extremist Jews who do extreme things and abuse the sources. I also believe that there are Muslims who are extremist Muslims who abuse the sources. Now, over to you. Sorry, do apologize for the long speech.
It was supposed to be a quick fire round.
But you're raising points, they need to be responded.
It's fine.
Your turn to respond, and then
I want to point out is what just happened then. So, we went to the Almohads and we agreed on the Almohads. They're not good Muslims. You brought a proof which was Maimonides. And we then established that actually your understanding of Maimonides maybe isn't the Jewish understanding of Maimonides. And the Jewish understanding of Maimonides is that he was persecuted under Islam. You then went to some a lot of material that I haven't heard of. So you mentioned Petrus Ephron or something. Never heard of it in my life. So we're now talking very fringe sources which most Jews are not familiar with. So I will go away and read.
Bernard Lewis.
Bernard Lewis he's a historian. He's got nothing to do with the actual. I'm talking
He's
about
Jewish historian.
I'm talking about source material. I'm talking about the source material. And then you mentioned, and you went to the 16th century Ottomans in Israel. Now I would encourage anybody to type into Google 1517 massacre of Jews in Hebron. The Jews were massacred by Ottomans in Hebron, in Israel. And so again, at a time when you've given as Jews having a good straight to the massacre. At a time when Jews were supposed to not being persecuted, there's a clear evidence of not just persecution, but a massacre taking place in the very land you said it was supposed to be amazing. Now, you've said a lot of truth. There were Jews that did achieve great positions, including Maimonides, in Islamic society. But achieving a high position in some Islamic societies does not mean that Jews are being treated well throughout Islamic history. The Jewish understanding, if you speak to any of the Jews from the Middle East, almost all of them will universally tell you that they suffered in modern history and in ancient history. And so I believe Jews and Muslims can and will coexist. I think we have more in common than that divides us, and I think we do have a rich history of coexistence. But I think there needs to be a recognition from many Muslims that history isn't as they see it through these rose-tinted glasses, but their ancestors have inflicted pain upon my ancestors. And you can go right the way back to Muhammad. You can go back to the Battle of the Trenches. You can go back to the beheading of Jews. You can go, but from the very, very beginning, there has been persecution. Now you can justify that and say they were treacherous, they betrayed Muhammad, therefore. But to this day,
you're doing it for me.
But to this day, because of a battle that took place hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, I, a Jew, am not allowed to step foot in Mecca and Medina. I am not allowed to live in Arabia. Umar, who's quoted often as being one of the best caliphs for the Jewish people, Umar kicked the Jews out of Arabia. It was Umar that pushed them out, and he actually sent them to Hebron in Israel, and he sent others to, I forgot the name, I'm terrible with Middle Eastern geography, something I'm not going to people can look up.
You're making a lot of points, and it's going to take me a long time to respond to all of them. So if you don't want a long response, keep it short, and I'll keep it short.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're throwing Omar, you're throwing Jews in. You're throwing a lot of things at me.
All I'm doing is saying, and it's a very simple statement, that anybody who believes that the Jewish existence under Islam was consistently good is consistently stupid. There has been good times and bad times. There have been good Muslims and bad Muslims, good Jews and bad Jews. Now to bring it back to the jizya, you said no, because you didn't let me do this.
No problem. Continue. Carry on. Then my response is going to be.
I'm trying to keep mine as brief as possible, just for the sake of the engagement of the audience.
Okay. Go on long, extensively. Talk about all the things I mentioned, all the sources I gave. What's your response to those sources?
I'm going to go to. So to be honest, I would have to go away and read them. So I know the epistle. I know Maimonides well.
So if what I'm saying is true, you're going to come back and
next week.
you're going to come back and confirm everything I said. Okay.